She walked into the room and headed to the seat, only to be stopped halfway down the last row by someone that had reached out and grabbed her by her arm. Startled, she looked up and with a sinking heart saw it was David. "Hey, vet," he said, still holding her arm. "Looks like we're in the same class, huh?" She smiled politely and eased her arm free. "Hey, David," she said, and continued her walk to her seat. What she really wanted to say was, "Duh, yeah, we're in the same class, you doofus. Now get your grimy hands off of me." But she kept silent and couldn't wait to get to her seat and get a towelette so she could disinfect her arm. David had been pursuing Vet since the first day of high school. In his words, she was the finest thing he had ever seen. He was her cross to bear because everyone teased her about him, knowing she ducked him with every opportunity she had. At 6 feet, he was taller than all the girls and especially Vet. He was trying to let his hair grow so he could get it braided, so it was at that uneven stage of nappiness. He loved to play ball and did so at every opportunity. He was always sweated out, and it seemed deodorant was just not in his vocabulary. He was not an ugly person, just plain and ordinary. And this did not necessarily bother Vet and the other girls had it not been for his bushy brows and the fact that he never cleaned his ears. "Oh my God!" exclaimed Vet one day to her sister upon describing him and his hideous hygiene problem. "Did you see his ears? If we ever had a blackout, all we'd have to do is stick a wick in his ears and we'd have light for days," she said. And this caused the girls to nickname him Candle. Sitting down in her seat, Vet hastily pulled a towelette from her bag and wiped her hand and arm where Candle had touched her, thinking she couldn't wait to tell the girls who was in her class. She had her head down, ignoring the classroom chatter, as she always did, when suddenly a hush fell on the room. She looked around to see if the principal was the reason why everyone had quieted and focused their attention on the door. Suddenly, Vet felt the room closing in on her. Her heart began hammering in her chest a mile a minute, and her head felt like it was being squeezed very tightly. Is this what a heart attack feels like? She wondered to herself. She hoped she was not having a heart attack, but she surely wished she could disappear because the dark, sexy stranger from the bus had just walked into her room and was headed toward the empty seat right next to her. With panic swelling inside her, she desperately fought to control her emotions as well as her facial expressions. She turned her head to look out the window just as she felt him sitting down, brushing her arm in the process. Why did it suddenly get so much hotter in here? She thought, swallowing hard and keeping her gaze out the window. And what is that infernal tapping on her shoulder? She thought, turning to see that it was him tapping her on her shoulder with his finger. "Yes?" she asked after finding her voice and looking into his sexy brown eyes. "Hi, I'm Rife," he said in the sexiest voice she had ever heard with his hand outstretched. "Hi, I'm Vet," she answered, shaking his hand. He smiled at her then, and so sweet and so tender was that smile, she thought. Surely she was going to melt into a puddle in the classroom in front of all these kids and Candle and Rife. Feeling a blush creep up her neck and spread to her cheeks, she silently thanked God for her chocolate complexion and gently removed her hand from his, returning her gaze out the window. She stayed that way until the bell rang, signaling the end of homeroom and the beginning of first period. Thank goodness, she thought, glad to be able to put some distance between them. Rising to her feet, she was surprised when Rife stepped to the side, allowing her to pass in front of him. After you. Thank you. Why didn't he just walk out the door like all the other boys did? She wondered. This was the second time today she was conscious of Rife checking her out from behind. She carefully picked her way through the many chairs that had been pushed back and left haphazardly in the aisle. The last thing she wanted was to trip or fall in front of Rife. Once she had gotten out of the classroom, her pace picked up and she sped to her first period class, glad to be away from Rife's sexy brown eyes. As she headed to her second floor class, two thoughts clouded her mind. One, would Rife be in any more of her classes? And two, wait until she and told Net what had happened. Chapter 3. All good things must come to an end. Matt Jones had to pray several times on his way to school this morning. That was the only thing keeping thoughts of murdering his sisters from his mind. They really crossed the line this time, he thought. Growing up in the Jones house, surrounded by prayer and women, had developed in Matt a good sense of humor, a strong sense of optimism, and a strong arm from constant use of his punching bag. But this morning, it seemed his humor and his sense of optimism was not working, and unfortunately, he didn't have time to work his frustration out on his punching bag. Being the oldest and the only boy, more was expected of Matt in the area of self restraint, responsibility, and common sense. There were times Matt felt too much was expected of him and that his sisters got away with more than he did. However, every time he brought this topic up with his mother, she always downplayed the situation and turned it around to make it seem that Matt was making a mountain out of a molehill. Matt loved his mother with all his heart, but sometimes it seemed she was partial to the girls and let them get away with murder. It was at those times that he missed his father the most. Mr. Jones died when the children were 14 years old from congestive heart failure. It was the second time the Jones family had experienced death of a relative, and it still seemed the family, especially his mother, had not gotten over the loss. Matt and his father had the perfect father son relationship. They played ball together, went to the movies together. Sometimes the girls would come along, much to Matt's dismay. It was a puzzle to everyone when Mr. Jones started complaining of feeling tired all the time, despite that he was in such great physical shape and still in his early 40s. When the situation persisted, he was diagnosed with CHF and he was put on all kinds of medication. The next 5 years were filled with doctor's visits, tears, and lots of prayer. When it became evident that Mr. Jones's heart was worse than previously diagnosed and that his health was going to steadily decline, Matt noticed the light began to fade from his mother's eyes that to this day has not returned, and his father has been gone now for 2 years. Mr. Jones called Matt to his room one day